Welcome to another episode of Ghosts or Demons. This is Dr. Loomis, the unofficial Dr. Loomis. And I'm here tonight with Dr. Neil Clayton. That is the real Neil Clayton, correct?
That's correct. Dr. Loomis, great to be here.
Hey, it's good to have you. Yeah, typically we'd have Jason here with us as well. But tonight it is just you and I. So that's going to bring a whole another field to that because we share an experience that we will talk about tonight that we went through in college. We'll leave the college unnamed to make it more mysterious, but we'll just talk about an experience that happened in college to both of us and plus another person. And we all seen that, but I'd like to talk about that tonight. But Neil, did you know what yesterday was?
Yesterday was the 12th of February.
That's correct. Today is February 13th. Yesterday was Abe Lincoln's birthday. Abe Lincoln's birthday. And I don't know. Do you know much about Abe Lincoln?
I was a huge presidential trivia buff.
Were you?
Yes. As a kid, I had them all memorized like baseball cards. I knew their stats, everything.
Okay. All right. There are some mysterious things about. I was just about to test your knowledge. I love history as well, facts, presidents, good stuff. But there are some mysterious things about Mr. President Abraham Lincoln, because I think once you're a president, you're always a president, right?
Yes.
Kind of like a Navy SEAL.
Yes.
But but there are some mysterious things about Abe Lincoln. And I don't know if you knew this or not. Did you know that when he was assassinated, he died with a $5 bill in his pocket?
I did not know that.
Do you know who's on the $5 bill?
Back then, I don't.
Well, back then it would have been Abe Lincoln.
I seriously doubt that.
No, hand to God, Neil. I'm not playing around. This isn't a playing around podcast. This is facts, my friend. You Google that. You do your research, or what we call research. That means you Google it. He dies with a $5 bill in his pocket. It's got his face on it. He posed for that picture. Let's see, he dies in 1865. Okay, Abe Lincoln doesn't die. He gets shot, assassinated. Finds a $5 bill in the pocket. I believe. Now I'm going out on a limb, but I believe that $5 bill still exists today, and it's worth a lot. Okay.
$1 $5?
$5. And more than $5, yeah. Which is interesting. When I started to look up the $5 bill, this is so kind of off topic. I'll say it real quick, but banks recycle money. I had no idea about that. And so the average life of a $5 bill is about 5 years, and 5.5 years. When a bank gets a $5 bill that's over 5.5 years, they recycle that stuff. I didn't know that. I didn't know what happened to money. I don't know. I just thought you spend it, it goes away. But no, it goes to the bank, they recycle it. So another thing happened to Abe Lincoln that's kind of mysterious. He's married to Mary Todd Lincoln, his wife, right? Mary Todd becomes Mary Todd Lincoln. He's married to her. And are you familiar with her at all?
A little bit.
Okay.
She had some mental illnesses.
She did. Yes. And that is
so did Abe as well, but she's known for it more.
Yes, she struggled with stuff before she married Abe. I want to say maybe some childhood stuff or whatever. She dealt with that even at a very young age. And then I think they lose their son, Tad. Mm-hmm. I think. Man, yes. I know I feel like I'm on shaky ground because I don't ever want to. I'm not a history buff. I read up. I try to keep up on things, and but I think it's Tad who passed away at a very young age, and she maybe, for lack of better words, has a nervous breakdown, but she's never the same, and that caused a lot of strife with Abe Lincoln
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
Okay, so I say all that to say this: she was also a spiritualist, meaning that she was into some spiritual things, like and I don't want to say exactly what, because I don't want someone to listen to this and be like, well, that wasn't true. She was just into some kind of taboo spiritual things. Okay, I'll leave it at that. All right, I'll leave it at that. So you could imagine when you lose somebody, you want to, we miss them, and because we miss them, we want to reconnect. Whatever your beliefs are, I think most people believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, or you tell me what you've heard. Most people believe. I don't really care what you believe, but I think there's some similarity in that most people would say that when you die, you're going to be reconnected with your loved ones. What say you?
I would say most people have some
Yeah,
version of that belief in their
right. It's
philosophy.
not a hard sell. It's not a tall order. It's something that maybe we all believe. I mean, because we've all been to funerals. We've all said stuff like they're in a better place, or we'll be reunited with them. Um, so, okay, so I, I say that to say that she's probably trying to connect. I would imagine trying to connect with um, Ted or something that brings her to her experiences with spiritualism. I could be wrong on that. Go look up that stuff yourself. There's books on her. I read a little bit on her spiritual life, but 7 years later. So Abe is assassinated 1865. 7 years later, which would make it 1872. 1872. Okay. Flash forward. She finds this guy, William H. Mumler. And she has a picture taken with this guy. This is important because William Mumler, can we call him Bill? Bill Mumler? I like that. I wonder if they're talking about Bill Mumler. Sounds like a used car salesman name. She finds William Mumler, and he is a spiritual photographer. Never heard of that. I don't know that that is even duplicated today that I know of. And if you're thinking, what the heck is a spiritual photographer? He takes pictures of people, and people show up in the photos. That's it. So there is a famous picture of her, 1872. She's sitting there prim and proper, and there's Abe Lincoln with his hands on her shoulders, kind of looking down at her like he's with her. And it's a faded picture of Abe Lincoln behind her. Well, this gave her a whole lot of comfort. And the story goes that, I mean, this guy's taking photos of people. I mean, that's what he does. He's a spiritual photographer. He's taking pictures, and it's working. He's there. You can look. You can type in William Mumler and look at all his spirit photos of people, famous people. And if you're like me, you're like, oh man, I don't get that. Where do you file that? Where do you put that? I don't know what to do with that. Now, instantly, I think, okay, either the guy's a fraud or this stuff is real, right? Then this stuff is real. And so the story goes like this. There's a man who's like an investigator. He goes to check this guy out because I'm assuming this guy's making some money off these photos. I don't know that he just does it for free. I mean, he's got to eat, right? And but he's becoming very popular, very known for doing the spirit photos. And they're going to investigate this guy, Bill Mumler, right? So a guy shows up. I don't know his first name. His last name is Black. So we'll call him Mr. Black, right? Mr. Black shows up and he's a big skeptic. In fact, he's talking trash to William. And he's saying to him, he's checking out his whole camera. He goes, you're going to take a picture of me, but I'm going to look at your camera. I'm going to check everything out because you're not going to pull one on me, right? You do this with everybody else, but you're going to take a picture. And if you pull anything, I'm going to know about it, right? Those are the type of words he's saying to him. Checks the camera out, looks at all that, makes sure there's no double negatives in there that, whatever. And he sits down. And Mumler goes to take a picture of him. Bulb goes off. Black stands up, goes over to the camera, watches him right there pull one negative out. Walks with him to the room where they're going to develop the negative. And they put it in chemicals, right? I mean, that's how you remember, like 8th grade. I don't know if you ever made a photo in junior high, but that's how you do photos, right? You take that negative and you put it in the chemicals and then the picture appears. And that's how they did that back then as well. And this guy's waiting. He's just watching it. In fact, Mumler says to him, he says, would you like to put the negative in the chemicals? And Mr. Black is like, no, I'm not smart enough to do this stuff. This is you. And if I was to actually mess it up, then you're going to blame it on that. So Mumler puts it in there. And they're both looking at it. And Mr. Black, within seconds, changes his thoughts about Mumler. Because what he sees in the photo is a picture of a woman who he would identify as his mother. And Mr. Black was orphaned at the time, or at the age of 13. And he sees his mother in this picture. Stunned. What a story. The later part of the story, they send another investigator out as well. He sees something. They get this guy in court. They charge him with being a fraud. But then history tells us he is acquitted. I don't know details about the court case. I don't know what the actual charge is. Was it fraud or is there another name for it? But that's the story of William Mumler. Okay, so what do we do with that? Well, if you're tuning in, this is an episode of Ghosts or Demons. And we are the Dead Paranormal Society. So, the Dead Paranormal Society. Neil, you had some questions for me earlier as it's kind of coming into this. You had some questions that you thought maybe some other people would have as well. And what might some of those questions be?
Well, first of all, I mean, explain your name, Dead Paranormal Society.
Right. Most people see it. They don't ask questions. We're on Twitter. And it's an acronym, dead, D.E.A.D. Right. So it's an acronym, but no one ever asks what dead stands for. I mean, if you see an acronym, it stands for something. Nobody asks because it just makes sense. Dead Paranormal, and people just add me as a friend. Right. But dead actually stands for demons emulating as the deceased. Now think about that. Demons emulating as the deceased. So emulating, kind of copying or appearing as the deceased. That's what Dead Paranormal Society is all about. And you had some questions about that.
So you're saying anything that would be chalked up as paranormal would be considered demonic?
Yes. In so many words. And I hear people talk about this ideology, maybe on their podcast or whatever. But I've yet to see someone who believes what we believe, and I know they're out there. I just haven't met them or come across them yet. I did. Let me take a time. Let me pause for a second. I was listening to a podcast last night, Paratalk Radio. I was listening to them last night. They were talking about, which I recommend. They're on Podbean. If you get a chance to go over there, Podbean, check them out. Paratalk. They were having a great conversation about past crimes, murderers. They were talking last night about killer clowns and cannibals, which comes back to evil. I mean, that's evil incarnate, right? When we see somebody like Albert Fish, right, who they talked about last night in the podcast, when you know his story, when you see some of the grotesque stuff that people can do to other people, that is evil, right? And we look at that and we want to stay away from those people, want to stay away from those things, right? Because it's evil. Dead Paranormal Society, demons emulating as deceased. Here is the thought. Here's the angle from which we see everything. From a biblical standpoint, now, right there, somebody just pushed the pause button and said, I'm out, because maybe they have different thoughts on the Bible. That's for a whole nother discussion. Okay. So just know this, that even if you might have questions about the Bible, I think questions are always good. Okay. So first of all, let me just say, if you got questions and you got doubts or whatever, that's fine. Okay. That's fine. It's okay to have questions, but look for the answers and watch where you get the answers, right? That's the only thing. Watch where you get the answers. So if I was going to Taco Bell and asking them about hamburgers, they're going to give me their view on hamburgers, right? So watch where you ask about hamburgers. So that's all I'll say about that. But I've had questions in the past. I don't question much now because I've had those questions answered in a way that makes sense that the Bible is what it says it is. Okay. So I come from that faith aspect there on the Bible. Okay. But from a biblical standpoint, looking at, because there's only two ways you can look at things, Neil. And I know I might be taking a long way to answer this question. There's two ways to look at things. You can either look at the world through the lens of the Bible, or you can look at the Bible through the lens of the world. That's interesting. I have polarized those, and maybe there's some in between there, possibly. But that's the kind of stuff that makes sense to me. So I really try to look at the world through the lens of the Bible, meaning things that are normal and things that are paranormal. Okay. And so in general, the Bible tells us not to talk to the dead. I'm speaking in general. I'm not popping out the verses right now, stuff like that. But in general, it would steer the believer away from talking to the dead. It talks about Satan being able to masquerade as an angel of light, okay, or as light. And it says that we have an enemy, which is Satan, the devil, who is here to steal, kill, and destroy. Now, why is all that important? Well, because when we're talking about stuff like Abe Lincoln and Mary Todd and a spirit photo, how do we process that? Well, I know how every ghost show or most every podcast is going to spin that. They're going to spin that as, well, it's Abe Lincoln, and when we die, we can go float around and be with our loved ones and be in pictures, and that's great. From what I understand on the Bible, what makes sense to me, there is no coming back. When you take your last breath, you're in a maybe, for lack of better words, a holding place until the end. Okay. But there is no crossing over. There is no going back to talk to your relatives. It doesn't exist. In fact, we're told the opposite in the Bible. We'll bring those up maybe even on another night, because I'd like to give certain scriptures its due from the passage and contextually and stuff like that. But I'm just speaking in general. We're
So,
not. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
so if someone says, I had a dream the other night, and as soon as I woke up, I felt the presence of my dead mother.
Right.
That's demonic?
It's hard to process that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because when you say demonic, I have pictures of a little girl flipping up in her bed and spitting out pea soup and stuff like that, and weird voices and little girls speaking in Latin. I think of people who are possessed. When you say it like that, is that demonic? Yes. So let's say this. Is that from, does that come from a dark power or a dark place, a dark entity? Yes. I
Hmm.
would believe so. Now, I say yes with my understanding. Okay.
So you're saying that a demon emulating as a dead person is not bound by geography or location. I mean, 99% of the time you watch any of these paranormal
Right.
shows on TV, they're always in the dark, wearing, night vision goggles,
Right.
going into caves or cemeteries or dark places. But you're saying they can actually exist and um, operate in the light, so they could be in a park in the afternoon as much as they can be in a cemetery in the middle
Absolutely.
of the night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that. When I say absolutely, I'm saying absolutely. I believe that could happen. Okay. Because, for example, because if we talk demons, we have to talk angels. And coming from being a believer in the Bible, we learned that, like in Sodom and yeah, Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, now I'm thinking about other things I was going to say with that. I knew it's Sodom and Gomorrah. It's like Simon and Garfunkel. You know. I wasn't pausing. I know I paused. It's like I forgot the other town, right? No, I was just thinking.
John, Ringo, George,
And
and
Yoko. Just kidding. My son bought a John Lennon album, a John and Yoko album. I've tried to raise him right, and I bought him the White Album for Christmas. But he goes out, he goes to a record store. Kids are into records these days, and he buys a John and Yoko album, and now he wants to burn it because it's horrible. It's horrible. And so I don't know. He likes that mainstream, but he likes to go off and find hidden gems. He thought that was going to be one. Instead, it's not a hidden gem. It just needs hidden. So anyway, just I'd throw that out
the
there.
angels and demons.
Yeah. Angels and demons. Sodom and Gomorrah, we see the angels came to visit, and two angels came to visit Lot and his wife. And they're approached by the people in the town. In fact, these men want to have their way with these angels. They're like, hey, these visitors, we want you bring them out. We want to have our way with them. And these are angels. We're told they're angels. So that's when you say, can an angel or can a spiritual entity, whether it be good or bad, demon or angel, can it appear in the daylight? Yeah, I think so. I don't have a problem believing that because we see that in the Bible. From the garden, even in the garden, Adam and Eve see the serpent. And who is the serpent? It's Satan. And he's masquerading as a serpent. So he takes form of whatever. Why? Why does he take the form of a serpent? Because to show in his real form as a fallen angel, I'm guessing, I'm not seeing a fallen angel. If you would see Satan as he is now, possibly. I'm not saying he's got the the red tail and the horns and the pitchfork, but I think evil the way it manifests can scare us to death. Now, with saying that, from a biblical standpoint, every time somebody's seen an angel, the angel had to say, "Fear not."
Mm.
That's interesting. I mean, we are spooked with the supernatural or supernatural anyway. So yeah, they could. I believe they could be seen during the day.
But let me ask the question in this way: is there a higher probability to find one in a cemetery versus a park?
Yes.
Why
Yes.
is that?
Because we're looking for it. Because we're looking for it. Because traditionally, we're looking for those spirits. I think it comes back to our desire to want to connect again. So we might go to the grave, we might go to the cemetery, and when we're there, how many people have had experiences?
Mm.
I've had a number of experiences of my own in a cemetery. We'll talk about that on another night. But historically, how many people have had experiences with the supernatural in a cemetery? It's where the dead are buried, and it's who they emulate. Because if I can show up like your grandma, guess what? I miss my grandparents. I do. My grandparents have passed away. If I could have another conversation with my grandma and grandpa, I would in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. And that's why you can't. Because you would. Does that make sense? So it's a subtle way for the enemy to say, we're going to appear as something we're not. We could appear as something good. The Bible says we could appear as angels of light. We're going to appear as your grandmother, and then you're going to spend the rest of your life searching for grandmother, trying to connect with her, hoping you have those dreams, searching that out. I know other people that get into psychics, mediums, and stuff like that, to try to contact those who have passed on, seances, all that type of stuff. And all for what? For what reason? Why? For the enemy to take us away from having a connection with God. That's it. That's it. Having a connection with God. How subtle it is. Because you watch all these ghost shows, right? You can have, I don't know how many, we'll take Ghost Adventures for example. I don't know how many seasons they're on, but it's the same thing over and over. Did you hear that? Whoa, did you hear that? Oh my gosh, right? There's that guy. And it's always the same thing. They just have enough to make a show people will watch. They just catch that glimpse of a shadow going past a lighted area. That's it. We got evidence. And that's what the enemy wants. And I want you just to keep coming and coming and coming and coming, because there will never be enough. We're never going to give you enough. But as long as we have you on this path, here's what path you're not on. You're not on the path to connect with the Creator. You're not on the path to connect with the one who gave his son to die for your sins. Now, instead, I'm going to get you on this path. So it's very subtle. So when we talk about stories like Mary Todd Lincoln, you know how vulnerable she must have felt 1865, losing her husband, only after losing her son. I think she might have had other miscarriages or lost other kids before. I can't imagine that. And the enemy just breeds and just feeds on the vulnerable during times of grief. I was listening to a Catholic priest, Roman Catholic priest. He had studied in Roman Catholicism, and he had just left the Roman Catholic Church. He's one of their well-known exorcists, and I think he used to work with Zach on Ghost Adventures as well. So you might know who I'm talking about. If it's not the guy that's on there now, but this is the guy who worked with him in the past. And he talks about, he was just telling the story of how people like Zach will taunt ghosts. And if you've ever watched Ghost Adventures, they think they're taunting them. Hey, you push this woman down the stairs in 1840. Won't you push me down these stairs? Right? Come at me. And you got your muscle shirt on, your tats, your really cool glasses, your hipster look. And I'm not trying to trash talk that. I'm just saying sometimes how silly it appears because we don't know what we're messing with. That's the reason for this whole podcast. To bring another angle to say you don't know what you're messing with. There's one that does know what you're messing with, and that's the message with Dead Paranormal Society. Okay. He had said, he was having a conversation and of Zach taunting the demon or ghost or whatever they identified it as that night. And I think the conversation went like this, that Zach had said, come at me now. And then it's more taunting back to them that, see, you're nothing, you're weak, you're not coming after me. And that priest, he gave us a glimpse of the other side. He goes, here's what the demons are saying. Zach, we'll leave you alone right now, but we'll go away. You got your show. We'll go away right now because you got lights, camera, action on, but we'll be back. And we'll be there when you're sick. We're going to be there when you're weak. We're going to be there when things are dark, when you get depressed. We're going to be there when you feel vulnerable, when you're grieving loss. We'll be there. Better believe it. Right? And that's that mentality. That's that idea. So hopefully that makes sense. And that's taken some time to really pick this apart as to why. Because why do we need another paranormal podcast? I mean, I love hearing them and I listen to paranormal podcasts. But I'm like, why should we do one? Well, we got a different message. We got such a different angle at this stuff. So hopefully that answers your questions, Neil. Man, I gave you a lot of time to just sit back, kind of kick back and do whatever, but.
Yeah.
But that it would be all demons, and like I said, you got to struggle with the word demon, and then there's people like, well, I don't believe in demons. That's okay. You don't have to. That doesn't change anything, though. You don't have to believe in demons. I remember hearing a story about a guy who told a judge when he was getting sentenced, I don't believe in prisons, so I don't believe in going to prison. I'm not going to prison. Doesn't matter what you believe, really. The guy's going to find out a true reality that prisons exist, right? It's going to be a reality for him. Here's the thing. When you and I take our last breath, we find out the reality. We've been given a glimpse of reality through the scriptures of the Bible. So that's just ways in which I process stories like that. So yeah, February 12th, Abraham Lincoln's birthday, I was reading up on him. I came across that story. I'd never heard of that story. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And that was subtle. And that's the enemy. That's the enemy doing it again. Spirit photos. Where's he going to pop up next? Because it's not just the devil. It's not just Satan. It's the Bible tells us that a third of heaven fell, right? We don't know a third of what. A third of heaven fell. So that's the idea there. But Neil, you and I, we were in college. We had another experience, and we'll end with this story. Okay. We had another experience, which we're still talking about to this day. And should we go into it now?
Yeah,
Or should we leave it? Or should we leave it? Make people buy the whole trilogy? I don't know. I'm just kidding. We don't. This is free.
I find it interesting, especially with rock and roll. Why is rock and roll so tied in to to the occult?
Yeah, good question. Well, are you asking me or are you about to tell me?
No, I'm asking. I've always found it intriguing.
Satan, when he was a fallen angel, was named Lucifer. And Lucifer, the angel, was a keeper of light. It was all about light. And I could be mistaken, but I don't think I am. I when I make these disclaimers, I'm just trying to be careful because I hear a lot of people say stuff, and I instantly want to correct people. To the best of my knowledge, he has everything to do with light, and he has stuff to do with music. Okay. Now, you take both those together, and light music, light rock. No, I'm just kidding. Not light rock. But music does something to us, you know. Music is another way for the enemy to use what's happening in the culture of the day and use it for the mission to subtly take away people's focus from a God who gave his son Jesus to die for your sins and who wants to be in a relationship with you. The enemy will subtly take people and either keep them from that, never hearing that stuff, or even if they have heard that, we're going to keep you so busy following demons now or this activity or whatever's going on. And so then we have this story. We're in college, 1994. Now, this would have been 96, I believe. 1996. You feel like that's the right year, Neil? Could have been 95, possibly 96. Doesn't matter. Mid 90s. We're in college, and the Beatles anthology just came out. Right. And we're big into music. I mean, all of us were. There's 4 of us in the dorm. We were into music. We loved it. When the Beatles anthology came out, we bought it and we get it home. We're listening to the CD, and there's a song, "Free as a Bird." And this is where
on the album.
What's that? Say again. Sorry.
I want to say it was the first track.
Yeah, the first track, right? The very first song on the Beatles anthology. Number 1. There was 3 of them. On number 1 was "Free as a Bird," and this is John Lennon singing these lyrics, "Free as a Bird," but we'd never heard it. It was never released. And then when they released it, then they have Paul, Ringo, George, and all. They have them singing on it, and they release it, and it sounds like a full Beatles song. It was amazing. I could not wait to hear it, and when I heard it, I loved it. And then at the very end of "Free as a Bird," it kind of fades out at the end. And then you start hearing this little kind of ukulele sound. And then you hear, and you hear something backwards, right? That was pretty good, I know.
Good recreation.
Thank you. I'm going to play that backwards, actually, when we're done, just to see what I said or see what the devil said, something like that. But we hear that little piece. And Neil, if you remember, what did we do with that?
I think we record it off the computer and actually play it backwards.
Right. We took it, we put it on a computer. And Neil, you were high tech. You were a computer guy back then in the day, man.
Yeah.
And you were the only one with a computer in our dorm room. And I remember having to check my email on your computer. Oh, how times have changed. And so You were able to take that piece that was played backwards, and you were able to record it and then reverse it to where it played forward. And do you remember what it said, or do you need me to tell you?
I don't remember.
Neil doesn't remember. Neil's old. Actually, I'm older than Neil, but I get it. It's details. It said, "It turns out good in the end." That's it. Turns out good in the end. And that's what started all this with our experience, with the story we're sharing. So instantly, and I'm thinking these ways back then. I know that there's spiritual warfare, there's demons, there's angels. I don't believe in ghosts then either, just because I understand at least the Bible the way I understand it. There is no ghosts. There's always demons, right? Because the Bible tells us that we, our fight is not against flesh and blood, but it's against evil powers and principalities that are in the air around us. That's why, right? They're all around us. So we start talking about that. We were just mystified. It's almost like we did this amazing feat. We're able to take your computer and do this thing where we take backwards messages and now we decode them. And I remember we then said, "Oh, what else was backmasked back in the 70s, the 80s or 60s or whatever?" And I remember we took Another One Bites the Dust, right? Remember that?
Yeah.
We did the same thing. And backwards, it's, not, yeah, it's about that, and frontwards, it says, start to smoke marijuana, right? Remember that? Start to smoke marijuana. Google it, man. That stuff exists. I'm not lying to you. Neil has a hard time. Neil has a front row seat to this podcast. You may be listening and be like, "Dang, I didn't know it said that." Neil doesn't remember that stuff either, but that's what it says. We took Stairway to Heaven. Stairway to Heaven, you can play backwards. And so when we took Another One Bites the Dust, it's that part, Another One Bites the Dust. Ha! You play that part backwards. That's what says, "Start to smoke marijuana." I got it down to a T. I promise you, man.
Really?
Got it down to a T. You say really like you weren't there, man. This is so great. I promise you, this is Dr. Neil Clayton. We were roommates in college. Stairway to Heaven. We did Stairway to Heaven, and backwards it says Sweet Satan, Sweet Satan, so stuff like that. The Beatles had number 9 on the White Album. There's stuff on that. So you see what's happening in college? The Beatles come out with Free as a Bird, just that one little part. We were able to flip, and then we're starting to look at songs that were forward that we knew were backward messages. And what's that called? Backmasking, right? It's called backmasking.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I know we may be going off on a tangent, but do you think it was, do you think they did this intentionally to, I know they did it intentionally, but do you think the bands did it for?
Good question. That's a great question.
What was the reasons behind
it? If you remember, Neil, and I love that you asked that question because we dealt with that question back in the 90s during this experience. So there are intentional and unintentional. So what we did the same thing. We're on your computer and we're recording now. So you can see we're getting into, you're not going off on a tangent. You're adding what happened next. We're thinking of songs that had messages in them, but we've just heard about them. And now we're playing them on your computer and then taking the same recording device on your computer and flipping them backwards and listening to them backwards to find out messages. And we started that. We did it. It was much like this. It was in February. It was on a weekend. It was on a Saturday night when this happened. It's crazy. We're talking about this in February on a Saturday night. We would speak into the mic. So, for example, I could talk into the mic and say, "Another One Bites the Dust." And you can flip that backwards. And it sounds similar to "Start to Smoke Marijuana." We did it. We tested it. And there is an intentional way. Now, do they mean to do it? I don't know that. Probably there are some. I that's a whole nother question. But yeah, there are, and by intentional, man, I gotta believe back in the 80s, maybe you got your late 70s Ozzy Osbourne albums. They're gonna put some backwards masking stuff on there. They know what it says. I gotta think that they're not just putting it on there, hoping it comes up with something. It comes up with something. So it's intentionally put on records. Okay. When it's actual backmasking, But when you say another one bites the dust, how do you know what that says backwards? How do you know it talks about a recreational drug? That opens up your mind, but go ahead.
Do you think they did that intentionally with spiritual undertones, or were they just doing it for kicks and grins?
Once again, I think it wouldn't. That's first. I want to say I don't know. Second, I want to say there's two kinds of people in this world: those who are engaged by Jesus Christ and live to be influenced by the Holy Spirit on a day-to-day basis. And if you do not have a relationship with Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit does not dwell inside of you, okay, which is upon conversion. Some may disagree with that, but let's just go that route because this is my podcast. That I live with the Spirit inside of me. The Spirit is influencing me, engaging me, having a relationship with me. And if you don't have that, you have the other. You have the enemy. Subtle. It's subtle. So I don't know. But I would have to say it's not of God. We don't act. Man does not act on his own. Man acts on the influences, the things that influence us. And so that's what I'd say to that. But yeah, we tried to say the stuff on there, and we're spending our time. I think we started this on a Friday. It goes into a Saturday. We did Friday night. We spent all day Saturday afternoon into Saturday night, and we're doing backmasking. It's like we're at a Christian college, and we're spending a weekend backmasking. It's like, man, how did that happen? But it happened, right? And so
we get to the Doors.
So I sit and think, hey, you guys are talking, we're all talking about songs that are very notorious for spinning them backwards on a record player and hearing stuff. And I brought up the Doors. Now, I've had many experiences in my life, and quite a few of them happened as a kid. That's for another podcast as well. One of the experiences, I'm around 10 years old, and I'm listening to the Doors album. I'm talking about the classic 1967 Elektra Doors record, The Doors. It's their first one. And it's the one with their faces on it. And I would just sit and stare at the album. And I would put the record on. I listened to it. And I was specifically drawn towards the song, The End. And if copyright laws permitted, I'd be playing it right now in the background, right? So as listening to the song The End, I'm drawn towards that. And I remember thinking, I'm 10 years old, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm looking at the album, and there's a part in the song where Jim Morrison talks about, and the killer awoke before dawn. It's towards the latter half of the song. The killer awoke before dawn, and he put his mask on, and he walked on down the hall, came to a room where his mother was, and he came to a room where his father was, and he's killing him. Came to a room where his sister was, and he's singing this stuff. And then there's another part where he's talking about, rapes his mom and all that kind of stuff in the song. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, this guy, how did he make an album? He kills his whole family. I didn't understand that Jim is talking about Greek mythology. Um, and but he's singing these songs. I'm having this experience. It feels evil, right? It just feels evil. I'm listening to it on the record player. I'm wondering, man, I'm starting to feel sorry for this guy. Like, man, how? Or sorry for his family, rather. I'm looking at this guy. This guy's evil, you know. And I knew of backmasking. I'm 10 years old. So if I'm 10 years old, it's 1985. Backmasking was a thing. So I just knew, I don't know if I seen it on like a talk show like Geraldo back in the day or something where they talked about spinning music backwards. And I remember for whatever reason, I'm all alone at 10. That was the 80s, right? Doesn't matter. You're 10, you take care of yourself, right? And I spin the record backwards. You know, all that. It's weird. You hear that stuff. I remember hearing something, and I didn't know what. I couldn't make sense of it, but I felt like this is not good at all. And I stopped. Okay. End of that story. Now go back to the 90s or fast forward to the 90s in college. I bring up, hey guys, the Doors movie had just come out, right? I had the CD of the Doors soundtrack. And I said, Neil, pop in this CD, play the end, and specifically play the part where Jim starts talking about the killer awoke before dawn. It walks on down the hall, right? Start to play that. So you took that part, you clipped that part, that whole part, and you spun it backwards on the computer, on the recording app thing that you had. And that's where everything changed. And if you remember, I'm going to tell you because you probably don't.
I don't remember what was said,
I'll tell you.
but what I do remember is
Yeah.
what I felt.
Yeah. So we play it and we're all, see, and these are the subtleties of the devil, of the enemy, to take these three Christian guys who are trying to set their life aside to follow Christ, to study and study the word, to study ministry, to study all those things. And here you have the enemy subtly just taking our time and focus away. But you justify it in your mind. We're not drinking, we're not doing drugs. No, we're backmasking. It doesn't matter what you're doing as long as it matters what you're not doing. Right? It matters what you're not doing. So here we are. And we're intently listening to this. So we spin it backwards. And we're listening and we're starting to hear something backwards. And when you take, and I don't recommend this at all. So when I talk about this, and I'm kind of really putting in detail how we did it, I'm not saying go do it. I've done it since then. It doesn't work now. It worked that night. It worked out just like this that night and the following day. It does not do it now. I had those questions. Firm in my faith, I opened up that door and did it again to see what would happen. And nothing happened. None of this happened at all. So as we listen to it backwards, we hear, welcome those who've joined the highway. Okay. Welcome all those who join the highway, something like that. That's what it started off. And it almost sounds like he's having a meeting, like welcome to all those who join the highway. And then you hear, and this is all backwards, at the time, welcome those who join the highway. I know I'm gifted at that. But, and then it starts to say, shut the fucking door, it's cold, right? Mm-hmm. Shut the effing door, it's cold. And we're like, whoa, write that down. What's this mean? What's he doing? Is he having a meeting? Who's he talking to? We're into it. We're writing this stuff down. We play it again. I don't know at what point we play it again. We play it again. and you hear this. Shut the door, it's cold. Shut the door, it's cold. So you hear a whisper now before Jim's voice comes on backwards in this recording.
Yes.
Shut the door, it's cold. Shut the door, it's cold, right? And we're like, whoa, where did that voice come from? We've just listened to this like 15 times. Where did that come from? And we, at some point, flip the CD. Or, well, we listen to it frontwards on the recording. We listen to it frontwards. We listen to it backwards. Now we play it frontwards. And here's what we hear. Because it's right on the part where it says the killer awoke before dawn. So now frontwards on your recording, it says the killer awoke before dawn. The killer awoke before dawn. And that's Jim talking at that point, right?
Hmm.
There's a whisper and then Jim. Whisper and then Jim. We don't know what happened. We don't know how that happened at all. Now, here's the other part of that. I take my CD out of your computer. This is the Doors soundtrack CD I bought from a Kmart back in the day. I take that CD and I go put it in my CD player in my dorm room. And I'm playing the Doors song, The End. And I fast forwarded to that part. And now on my CD, it says, the killer awoke before dawn. The killer awoke before dawn. And I would play that part for you if there wasn't copyright issues with that. But that's what happened. An extra voice is now on a CD. Guys, you got to realize this is before you could record anything on a CD. We had no idea of any knowledge of how to get stuff on a CD. It's impossible to take a CD you buy from a store and to add a recording to it. It wasn't a blank CD. So then we went and got our buddy. If you remember, so that Saturday night, we are freaked out at this point. We go get our buddy. Well, I say we go get him. We went to church the next morning, remember? Because it's like when you've been backmasking all weekend, guess what you're doing on Sunday, right? So we go to church on Sunday, and then we see our buddy. And our buddy is from Nolens, New Orleans, or as he called it, Nolens, right? He's from New Orleans. To the best of my knowledge, this individual had been either directly or very close indirectly experiences with the occult. Okay. Do you remember that now?
I do.
Big guy.
Yes.
Not like fat. I'm talking about
Towers
huge, just
over me.
towers over you. Wears a big black trench coat, pale white. And this guy looks like he's still in the cult. He's a Christian. So we're like, hey, we're eating. They had like a dinner after church and all this free food. And when you're a college student, you're eating. You stay at church a little longer, especially if there's food. We're talking about what we're doing over fried chicken. And we're telling him, here's what we did. And he's just when I think, oh man, he's going to be like, wow, really into this. And he's going to want to come over and figure this out with us. And I'm trying to say, man, here's what happened. And then we heard another whisper. And then there was, the words, welcome to the highway, and all those who gather, and shut the door. What was he? And he says, stop. You need to stop what you're doing. That's what he tells us. You don't know what you're doing. You're opening it up. You need to stop. You're opening up doors you don't want to open. And I didn't want to hear that because I'm thinking, I have Jesus. I'm fine. I'll open whatever door I want, right? So he comes over. We talk him into, I don't know how we talked him into it. He comes over to our dorm room. There's me, you, and another individual, and then this individual that we have over. So there's 4 of us in the room. And we're showing him, okay, I get it. We opened the door, and you know what? We're going to close it. But I want to show you that how do you record on a CD? There's an extra voice on the CD now. And that's all I did. I just want to show him the CD. We're going to put it in a CD player, and I want him to hear the extra voice now. So we put it in a CD player. played that part of the song, and sure enough, it's there the next day on the CD. Not shut the door. The killer awoke before dawn. So it would, the killer awoke before dawn. The killer awoke before dawn. And instantly, if you remember, the door to your dorm room slams shut. We look at each other. He looks at us. We look at him, and we're out of that dorm room. Do you remember that?
I do. I do.
Scared the crap out of us. Now, later, that by that next weekend, I take the CD and I'm out in the nature reserve. It's probably illegal, but we had a fire out there and everything. And I remember burning that CD because it felt so evil. I couldn't even keep it now. I couldn't keep it in our dorm room. It would just, it felt evil. And when I threw it in the fire, I get it. CDs can make high pitched noises. You know, it's pressured plastic. I was with a couple other people, and I throw this door CD in the fire, and I've never heard a CD scream. You go try that tonight. Go throw a CD in the fire, see what it does. This thing screamed, and I knew I made the right decision. That's all. I knew I made the right decision. So now I only have the Doors on Spotify. So, okay, what a story. And yeah, we're going a little long with that. So it's a podcast. You could pause and come back to this later. That's fine. But how do we process that? Well, we know a little bit about Jim Morrison, and we'll start to wrap it up this way. Jim had a spiritual life as well. History would tell us he was raised in a Christian home, a very strict Christian home. He goes away from that, obviously, right? As many people do, because it's always like portrayed wrong. Like God is about rules and do this, don't do that, and you're bad if you do this, and I don't like you, and I'm angry at you now. And it's portrayed in such a crazy way, right? So he walks away from that. And one of the things, Jim Morrison, and I was infatuated with Jim Morrison. My dad introduced me to him early on. Like I said, 10 years old, I'm listening to the albums and I can't stop. And I read books. I knew all about Jim Morrison. And one of the things, I know he had weird beliefs. He thought we came from snakes. It was weird, some weird stuff out there. I don't know where he got that, but then he talked about the shaman. There was a thing with Jim and Native Americans, and I think whether I think there's a quotes out there of him telling a story of how he felt like a Indian shaman embodied him when he sang, and that was his muse. Okay, now I know this before we play that CD, so when I hear the CD and I hear the extra whisper, this is a knowledge that I knew, and this is how I processed it. Right or wrong, this is how I processed it, right? Jim talked about a shaman that would embody him, almost possess him, and he gave him and told him the words to say. That blows my mind, because later I would spin a CD backwards and there would be that voice on it backwards, but even more surprisingly, it would be on the manufactured CD frontwards now. So yeah, shamanism. Not that we got to break all that down. All I'm saying is there are many ways out there that the devil, the enemy, will subtly get us into taking our focus away from God, whether it's you believing that an Indian is possessing your body, or whether you're a Christian college student backmasking CDs on a computer. It's all the same. It's all subtle. It's all subtle. And it works. It works. It's real, and it's out there. That's what I want to bring to you guys tonight in this episode of Ghosts or Demons. And Neil, any thoughts on our way out of here tonight?
It's really just, for me, it's hard to grasp, just because I am I tend to separate reality from fantasy,
Right.
and this all seems like fantasy to me. But I know that's not true. I know that it's intertwined. I know there's other dimensions to this
Right.
life.
Right. And we haven't talked about these stories since college. I mean,
No.
we don't sit and, hey Neil, man, you want to go over that story again? This is the first time that we've probably told that story in its entirety
Yeah.
since the weeks leading after it. You know, now I've gathered people around a campfire and told them that before. Or I've had them in my office before, and I played the music and I told them, but never with Neil and never in that detail. But now
Yeah.
it's recorded. Now it's recorded. So, but that's what I wanted to bring to you guys tonight. Yeah, it can, this is just seeds. These are seeds. Let it grow. Whatever you think tonight is on the other side, whatever the Ouija board is connecting, whatever the backwards message is telling you, no matter what the shadow person or the next bump in the night that you think, if that's you, knock another time, show us you're there. Whatever experience you have the seed in your mind that it could most likely be something that we don't need to mess with, something that is tricking you in a very subtle way. Because the devil doesn't have to be evil to get you away from what is good. He just has to distract you from what is good. Just has to grab your attention and get you away from that which is good. So, well, guys, it's been good. It's been good just to talk to. That's almost therapeutic for all of us to revisit those days, man.
Yeah.
We could probably have so many stories of the college days, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking forward. We have some upcoming episodes we've already talked about on Ghosts or Demons. And at some point, we will talk about aliens. That comes in. That's interesting. That is super interesting. That's coming up. And Neil, you and I have talked about some things we're going to talk about as well. You don't have to believe everything we're talking about. If you're listening to this podcast, it's just I'm here to plant some seeds. I believe this wholeheartedly. If it gives you something to think about, something to chew on, allow that seed to grow. And until then, know that you have a creator who sent his son to die for your sins, who desperately wants you to connect with him through his son. And that's Dead Paranormal Society. Signing off. Good night, Neil.
Good night, sir.